Hey, everybody, good morning. Can you guys hear me? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks so much. All right, we're a few minutes early, so we'll get started in a minute. Thanks so much for coming, those that are on the call so far. Can everybody see the screen that says exclusive seller broker engagement agreement? Oh, wait, it's paused. Hold on. Can you guys see that? Anybody?
No.
Okay, hold on. How about now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Here's my girlfriend. Few more minutes and then we'll get started. I see people coming online now. While we're waiting, does anybody that was on the call last week, does anybody have any questions about the buyer's agency or the mutual or unilateral terminations? If so, just click that microphone bar to unmute yourself.
Renee,
Hey.
hey, it's Joyce Ray.
Hey, Joyce, how are you?
Are you providing anything like notes? Hey, are you providing notes like for the one last week I had to miss, but I would really love to have the notes on that.
Well, we had some technical difficulties and it didn't get recorded. So my process is every time we do one of these little meetings, I want to post it out on our YouTube channel, which is Chapman Hall Realtors. Just go to YouTube and then search Chapman Hall Realtors and you'll see the latest one. However, didn't happen last week. Everything's working now. It's recording. You can see the screen. So I plan to post this one this week. And just to bring you up to date, Joyce, what we covered were, kind of, just the highlights and the importance of the exclusive buyer's agency. Use it as a tool. Don't look at it as a deterrent. A lot of agents are having problems, speaking with buyers about their commission and, and stating their value and their worth and what they bring to the transaction. So that was, kind of a high touch description of what we talked a little bit about last week. Also, just to remind everyone, just because, and this really applies more to a listing agreement than anybody else, but a lot of agents believe that once a listing is out of the MLS, that, it cancels the agency agreement. You actually have to have a separate form for that. That's called a mutual termination, where nobody owes anybody any commission, or a unilateral termination, which leaves the door open to possibly obtaining a commission down the road, or referral fee, or whatever. So that's kind of like a high overview of last week. But what I'll do is we'll bring it back around as part of this series and offer it again. And then we'll have a full set on the YouTube channel. Because what I want to do is just kind of walk through what we do every day on these GAR forms as buyer's agency, listing agreement, purchase and sell, backup offer, lead-based bank. These are forms that I want to present to you guys and open it up for discussion, on how best to fill them out, worst case scenarios if something goes wrong, and it always goes wrong. And, just how you would use that form as a tool to better, benefit the transaction and or, your business and the parties involved. And I do want to say one thing. I'm a one-man show here, so I can't read the chat and give the presentation. So I'm not going to read the chat till we're done. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them as we go along. We're right at 11 a.m. I'm going to give it just 2 more minutes. We've got quite a few people on here. I want to give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. And I appreciate everybody's patience and participation. Okay, I've got 11:02 and I'd like to go ahead and get started to be mindful of your time. Thanks everyone for attending. For those of you that are just logging in now and coming online, I'm not going to use the chat function because I can't read it and give the presentation. So I'll hold that until the end. But if you do have a question as we go through the form, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. It may be a little bit of a delay here with the audio, but please feel free to do that. Once we're through it, then, let's really open up and talk about how, best to use this form, experiences that you've had, and just Q&A on it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Right off the bat, state law prohibits broker from representing seller as a client without first entering into a written agreement with the seller under ACOG 10-6A1 at sequence. I don't know. But the one way that you need to look at this is, and again, it reflects back to last week on the buyer's agency agreement, is you wouldn't have you wouldn't not have a written agreement with a seller like some people do with a buyer's agency agreement. They just, oh, let me go show properties and, oh, I'll get them to sign it later, or I trust them, they're loyal. No, always get it in writing. It's required by state law. Same with the listing agreement. Everybody's familiar with these. It's now 10 pages. When I started in the business, it was 3 pages. So they have added a lot of clauses, paragraphs, sentences, and protections for all parties to the agreement. That's buyer, seller, and both brokers if it's a co-op. So let's kind of dive in. Some of this stuff we're not going to spend a lot of time on. A lot of stuff I want to just point out and call to your attention. So exclusive broker engagement agreement, we all understand that part. Property identification, legal description. Every contract has to have a legal description on it. So you have choices. You can attach it as an exhibit here too. You can list the page, the deed book page of the land above, or you can go into land lot district section. Either one of these choices is fine, but you have to have some type of description on the agreement. Number 4, this is a thing that they've added recently where you can check number 4, and this becomes your condominium legal exhibit that you used to have to attach separately. Well, it's in here now as part of the agreement, very self-explanatory, but understand it's not to be used if property is a fee simple townhome. Fee simple townhome you treat like a typical residential property and would select one of the 3 above. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. List price and listing period. The way the market's changed and fluctuated and the influence that Zillow has on our sellers when we're trying to do a listing presentation is mind-boggling. Sometimes Zillow gets it right, sometimes they don't. So what you need to do if you're going in to a listing agreement, go in with a CMA and pull it, for locally, within a mile or, depending on the type of property you're trying to list, verifiable comps that are reasonable and within a relevant range. And then sit down with your seller and decide on the list price. Because in my opinion, what I don't like seeing if I'm searching for properties to show in the MLS is all of these price reductions, like every 5 or 10 days, it drops. Well, does that tell me that maybe there's something wrong with the home and they're getting inspections and it's not being disclosed? Do I have an agent out there that doesn't understand the pricing or has a seller that's too aggressive to get past pricing on? A lot of people think of these things, and I don't know. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But when I see a price reduction, I get a little uncomfortable with it. Any comments? Okay.
Well, you've seen as many, excuse me, have you seen as many price reductions, say, within the last 18
If you go into the MLS,
months as you did prior to?
yes, I would say yes. And that goes back to the prices fluctuating so very, very much, from one part of the city to the other. But one of my responsibilities is when folks put listings in, I need to go in and I need to check them as the broker. So I'm in the MLS a lot doing searches. And, I see them more now to bring it up in a meeting than I've ever seen them in the past. So, like I said, that tells me a couple of different things. Are we just not getting the pricing right, the comps right, or do we have too aggressive of a seller? And how do we overcome those 3 things?
I think it's also a changing market that's changing so quickly because, things aren't selling quite what they were last spring, for instance, with multipliers and so forth. So the sellers are still trying to go back to that pricing rather than, so it's like, show me that my
Yes, show me why it's not worth that much.
Mhm.
It is. And it's hard, on agents, because, the last thing you want to do is make that phone call to your seller and say, look, um, we just haven't had any showings, and I'm going to recommend a price reduction. Those are never easy conversations to have. But there's also not really a specific magic formula to get it right every time. I think it just depends on the individual situation that you're in with that property in that area and that seller, that, is going to dictate that. So moving on down, marketing. I highlighted this because I've seen some listing agreements whereby you guys are putting in Birmingham, Stellar MLS, Macon MLS, all of these MLSs that FMLS now offer, that our feeds are coming up on, but you're not technically marketing in those platforms. So I just simply want you to understand the difference. The listing is for, the Metro Atlanta market and FMLS, of course, in Georgia and GAMLS. So the only two multiple listing services you would put here would be either FMLS or GAMLS, not Birmingham, not Macon, not Stellar, not Puerto Rico. Now, will these listings aggregate out to these other sites? Absolutely, they will. But per se, in our market, we're only involved with just the FMLS or just GAMLS. So, and it's also going to aggregate to our website and then onto Zillow and Realtor.com and Redfin and Homes.com and ListHub and all of these other places will aggregate out to. You don't have to list all of that. I think it's important just to put FMLS and GAMLS if you're using both of the services. And just a side note for compliance, if you are a member of GAMLS and FMLS, you have to put the listing in both MLSs. Okay. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about was delivery agreement to listing with MLS. In FMLS, you have 3 days after binding of your listing agreement to enter it into FMLS. In GAMLS, it's 48 hours, it's 2 days. So bear in mind, within a 3-day period, you've got to get the listing in both MLSs. And that includes coming soon, which directly below that marketing commencement date may or may not necessarily be your dates of the listing at the top here. Let's go back up. Nope. Right here. List price and listing period. So that may conflict with your marketing date, because with marketing, maybe you want your marketing to commence prior to the 3 days to get it into MLS. So say you want to, get a photographer out there or that type of thing. Your marketing commencement date does not necessarily have to be the same date that the listing goes active in multiple listing service. So bear that in mind and use it as a tool. And it says shall have the right upon notice to broker to remove the date, to move the date up or back by not more than blank days. Also, again, for coming soon stuff. Any questions on that? Okay. Commission, pretty standard. One thing I do want to mention is there was a question that came up last week about remarks in the multiple listing service saying that, and I'm paraphrasing, if we show your client the listing, then your commission's only going to be 1%. So the answer to that question is essentially, if you are going to reduce a commission in the MLS based on who's showing the property or whatever other circumstance, then you need to disclose it to your seller in the listing agreements. Okay, and that's where it would go right here. commission adjustment to cooperating broker. There may be circumstances when seller broker may not pay the cooperating broker the commission referenced in section A4 above. These circumstances and commission shall be paid, and such circumstances are as follows. Now, remember, and this is a true rule, that if you offer a commission in a multiple listing service as a co-op, but you have a realtor or an agent that is not a member of that listing service, you're not necessarily obligated to co-op with them. Okay? It's a vengeful tool, so use it very, very carefully. In my opinion, I think that in our community, in our industry, we should always agree to co-op. But there can be extenuating circumstances, but you and your seller would control those circumstances. If there are no extenuating circumstances, then put NA right here. Okay. Always remember, if it's a blank line without an A, B, C, or D choice, always put NA, not applicable. Okay. So moving on down. Next is protected period. You know, we talked about this last week, and in my opinion, I don't think a protected period should be any greater than 30 days, either on the buyer's agency or on the listing agreement. That's my personal opinion on it. You know, it's up to you, but please remember that your limitations on a protected period are only people that you either showed property to, either in person or virtually, during the listing period before it was terminated by either the seller or the broker. Shall that protection period be defined? So what you need to understand is, just because you're under a 30-day protection period and your seller has canceled the listing, that you're not necessarily going to get paid on a commission if you didn't have documentation that you either showed that buyer either virtually or in person, or even that agent with those same buyers. You have to have that documentation. Any questions on protected period?
Wait, so you're saying that on a protection period, we're only protecting, we showed the buyer during our listing?
Okay, you're breaking up, Richard. Say it one more time.
You're saying that we're only protected if we can show documentation that we showed the buyer the house?
That either the buyer or a co-oping agent came through the property, and you would use that typically through
With
showing
that particular buyer?
Yeah. So yes, it would just be the people that came through
Okay, gotcha.
that you have documentation for. Does anybody have an argument or a question about the time period? Do you think it should be more or less? What is your experience?
Wait, what did you say?
On the protected period, the length of
time period was?
Richard, you're breaking up really bad.
I'm sorry.
Put it in chat and we can put it in chat. We can answer it at the end. I'm sorry.
How long did you?
I had a question.
How long do you recommend? How long?
I would say personally, no more than 30 days, but I'm looking for feedback from everyone.
I disagree. I think it should be 90 to 180 days, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, explain why.
I usually put 90 days in there. I do have a question. What would constitute documentation? You said you've got to have documentation. What would you consider acceptable documentation?
Either showing time, verification that they're either the buyer, obviously, is realtor or agent was at the property, any email correspondence, between you and a buyer, and any virtual property showing that you had done with a buyer. So text, emails, anything to verify that somebody came through this property during the length of time that you had it listed.
Now, Renee, I understand that, having the proof in the background behind it is the key, because it's got to be truthful. But this only applies if you actually provide the seller with the list, right? You can't come back in 30 days and say, here's the list. Don't you have a reasonable amount of time that you've got to provide who's come through the home and show I'm protected in these scenarios?
Yes, and yes, 100%, Alan. And here's the reason why. Typically, if you're getting into a situation where you're going to have to enforce a protective period, means that your seller probably terminated on you and went with another realtor, which makes you angry. And I can completely understand that. When they sign off, when they sign off on a unilateral agreement, which cancels the agency, it's unilateral agency cancellation form. And I'll tell you the form in a minute. Then that's when you present the list of protected clients. I mean, and I know a lot of you are really busy and everything, but if you've got a lot of listings and people are coming in and out of your house, you have to be aware of that. So you have to have some kind of documentation somewhere. I recommend showing time. It's the easiest. But if you don't, you have to be able to keep up with that, and you have to be able to prove it if you're going to enforce that protected period. But listen, I have a question for Jerry Wells. Jerry, you said 180 days thereafter. What?
No, I didn't say 190. I said about 90 is what I usually
90.
put. Somebody else said 180.
Okay, I apologize. Alan, was that you that said 90 or
Yeah.
180? I'm sorry.
It was me. I said 180 days, and I respectfully disagree with another
Okay.
agent who lists the property. You lose any right to a commission because you don't have any clients other than the seller. All of them are customers.
They are, but they're contacts that showed the property during your listing term. You're absolutely correct. Yes, they are customers. So, and further, the protected period is also there to keep a buyer and a seller from, firing both agents and buying the property as well. So, I mean, there are, and again, it's open for interpretation. My personal thing would be 30 days. If it's 90 or 180, I'm not going to disagree with that. You certainly have your reasons, but it's a discussion that a lot of agents have questions about. So I'm glad this is good feedback.
Two questions I have on one is, can you treat one customer differently than another? Meaning one's got 90, one has 30. Maybe your
No.
family member has 5. And another question I have is in all reality, if you were to push this point, and I don't think I ever have, who actually is going, what kind of cost and who's going to defend and go to, defend the case? Would that be on us as agents to attorney up or to, bring the case forward? Or is that with the office, Chapman Hall, and us together? Because, reality is it's going to cost more than $1,000,
Sure. And the answer to that is within the agreement, within all of the agreements and GAR forms, you have to agree to arbitrate first. Okay. Now you can file a claim for a commission, but in a situation where you are arguing the point of a protection period, that would go to arbitration. Okay. Now with arbitration, and even if you end up to the point of filing a claim, you have to have broker approval to do so, obviously. But if your case is strong enough and you're going to win, then you'll get your fees or attorney fees or whatever as part of the settlement returned, typically. But you have to have a well-documented ability to prove that in an arbitration and or further a court of law. Because arbitration is not final. They can turn it over to the magistrate if they want to, or if the parties can't agree. So to answer your question, case by case, depending on how strong of the evidence that you have. Not he said, she said.
And you can change the time around, or you should be uniform?
No,
on
it should
30,
be-
60, 90?
No, it should be absolutely uniform for everyone across of the board to be fair. You can't arbitrarily pick and choose a protection period. It's got to be the same. So, that lends to the point to go greater than 30 days at 90 or 180, whoever put that out there. But again, documentation is key. Any more questions? Okay, let's keep going. Agency brokerage, please understand the only agency that Chapman Hall and all of the Chapman Hall companies do not offer is dual agency. So when you guys are filling this out, this should be the only box that is not offered by broker. Okay. Next, and here comes the drama. Lead-based paint disclosure. It says very, very clearly in here that federal law requires disclosure of lead-based paint in homes/residential properties or a portion thereof constructed prior to 1978, select one below. A dwelling on the property or no dwelling on the property. Okay. Everybody knows, and this has been a big fight, that Chapman Hall prefers that all of our listing agreements contain the lead-based paint exhibit. And the reason why we ask that is simply to protect you, to protect the broker, and to protect the seller. Whether the seller knows or doesn't know, just by initialing a form they do not know would absolutely protect them. On this particular form, you can check A or B, obviously, but always recommend that they just go ahead and fill out the lead-based paint exhibit. It's clean, it's simple, and it protects them. If the buyer doesn't want to sign it, then that's up to the buyer and the buyer's agent. But at least we know we've gone above and beyond to protect the seller and to protect the broker and to protect your licensing as well. The fine is extremely expensive, and more are popping up because people are using, reclaimed woods and, buying decorative paints on Amazon or out of the country that can contain lead-based elements, and they don't even know it. So it's better just to sign off on it, say, I do not have any knowledge, and let it go from there. Any feedback on this?
So when a buyer doesn't sign, just submit it with what on it? Like,
Buyer refused to sign.
okay,
Okay.
got you.
And I would
I've
have,
had the
go ahead, please.
I have had the most problems with Keller Williams agents on this. I don't know if other people, because they've apparently advised, some of the companies have advised their agents to not get that signed. Do you know why they don't?
I couldn't imagine why. We attend, John and I both attend broker summits every year because it's important that we stay up to date on the latest rules and regs, as well as you guys do. And we've heard it multiple times that it's a very, very simple way to reduce your risk and protect your brokerage. I have no idea why any broker wouldn't be on board with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe that was just an excuse for an agent to say, I don't want to fool with it. But yeah, but I have heard that from other, it seems to have been from Keller Williams, if they have made that, they have advised their agents not to, that it's not necessary for them to sign that.
Yes, I understand. And not
Sign.
everybody's going to sign it. And again, that's unfortunate. And if that's the way they want to manage, then that's fine. We're going to try and do it, the less riskiest way possible, I guess is the best way to put it. Another thing too, that the lead-based paint exhibit says is that it has to be reviewed prior to submitting the offer. And a lot of agents have asked me about that. When you input your listing, you have the ability to attach your seller's disclosure or any other documents, if it's a foreclosure or a divorce sale or whatever, that need to be part of the agreement. I strongly suggest you put it out there. So at least we can say that the buyer's agent knew it was there and either refused to engage with that contract or document, but at least they know it's out there. So I would encourage you to probably put it, on your listing agreements as well. So, and, going back to Keller Williams, I hope they kind of come around. I hope a lot of brokerages do, because, it's just a risky business to run. So anyway, all right.
I have one comment there.
Sure, please go ahead. You're breaking up.
Provide one buyer and the seller. I have sent my buyer just a blank copy and let them know this is typically what you get. If they won't include one, a lot of times I'll send my buyer a blank copy to say, these are the things that could be asked for, or maybe in your due diligence.
That's an excellent point.
That makes sense?
Yes, absolutely. I like that idea. Just make them aware of the document like you would with any of the brochures. That's a great idea, Alan. Absolutely. Okay, let's go on forward. And down to this section, seller has the following special circumstances that require third-party approval before the seller can do the following. And again, these are questions we always ask, are you in bankruptcy? Is it a divorce? Is it anything else? Contract to sell? Is there a bankruptcy, divorce, or a short sale? But the one thing that I want to point out to everyone, just like when you pull your CMA to go into the listing appointment, make sure the people that you're meeting with have title to the property. Just, pop into to CRS or Real Tax and just make sure that if you're meeting with the Joneses, that the Joneses have title to the property or an estate or will be subject to acquiring title to the property. Because title work can put a seller in default very, very quickly, and it can cause months-long delays on a transaction that, the buyer's not necessarily expecting. So always, always ask that question if you don't already. Negotiation. I've never seen an agreement that wasn't checked, does not want to authorize broker to assist. Has anybody ever had that experience where a seller didn't want to agree to allow an agent to negotiate with them? See, I didn't think so either. I've never seen it. Does not. Okay. Now we go into the deep dive of the listing agreement that a lot of people really don't get into or explain with their seller during the, going through this form. So I've highlighted a few little things that I just want to point out that you might want to bring to the attention of the seller as you're going through representation of this agreement. Okay. Exclusive brokerage, list price, listing period, marketing. One of the things in marketing that I wanted to highlight that says images, section B, broker shall not be liable to seller if other brokers or buyers take photographs, videos, or use other technology to capture, manipulate images of the property without permission of the seller or broker. Has anybody ever had a seller saying that they didn't want pictures taken of their property by anybody other than the promotional photographs for the listings?
I'm rental.
Say
Yes, that's funny. I just had a listing, and the young woman didn't want photos taken of her house.
How did you?
She wanted me to use. Well, she wanted me to use stock photos of when the house was new. Like it was a new build back in 2020.
Right, I understand.
So I did that. I used the photos that were taken of the new build, like when she first bought it.
But you didn't own those photos. You can't.
Correct.
Yeah, multiple, the MLS has rules that you have to own the licensing or have taken the photo in order to post it. So in other words, like if you have a photographer, they sign an agreement with you that they're going to allow you to use the pictures in marketing. If you take a nice camera or your cell phone and you go and take pictures, you own that product. Okay? You can't, I mean, you can't take a builder's photos and market them as a current listing. It's false advertising for all intents and purposes. So, and further in the paragraph above, Richard, it goes in and explains that the home basically needs to be represented in its current form. It can't be, and especially the first photograph, which is typically the exterior of the property, has to absolutely be a recent photo of that to be compliant. Now, does everybody follow that rule? No.
Well, so yeah, that
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that picture I did, that picture was her actual house. I took that picture on the outside, and not because of that reason. It was because when they went to see the house, so I didn't know about that. But I'm just saying, I did take a picture. I told her I need to take a picture of the outside so it doesn't create confusion.
Yeah. And
so yeah,
I would recommend taking those other photos down because number one, you don't own them. And number two, they're not the current representation of the property. But also if you guys are looking at listings, have you seen any listings that have been virtually staged? Anybody?
Yes, I do.
Okay, when you look at those virtually staged, there's a disclaimer on there that says this property was virtually staged, and you'll see a photograph of the room with the furniture virtually staged and a photograph without. So look at it as the same thing. It's a misrepresentation of, could be the space, the size, the condition, anything of the property. So you want to avoid that at all costs, avoid the risk. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, I was gonna say so you can't do the virtual. Don't take the watermark off of the virtual staging pictures, and it clearly it'll say virtual stage at the bottom of it.
No, you have to leave that on there if you're going to use virtual stage. Now, if you want to, the thing that concerns me about the photographs you're using on your listing as an example is that you didn't have them, you didn't pay a photographer to take them, the seller doesn't own them, and you don't own them. That's what concerns me there. So even going in and
Right,
putting
well, for that, right, for a particular one, that was the only time I've ever
okay,
done in, because it was like that one-off time, since the 10 years that I've been doing this, that she just would not allow pictures of the inside.
Yeah.
And I also had to fight her about actually people coming in. She didn't know that selling a house, that's part of selling a house, that people actually walk through your house to
Right.
see it. So it was a first time selling situation. She thought it was more so like how she bought her house when it was brand new. Like she just went to see it and
right,
type of thing. So yeah,
right.
it was a very awkward, weird
Well,
situation.
during COVID, there were restrictions and people were doing a lot of virtual tours. I think that's a conversation during the listing appointment that you should have with them. Do we need to revert to, COVID presentation and nobody comes through the house, or they come through, with masks and little shoe cubbies and all that stuff? Or, are you just going to allow me to market to the highest and best the property can be marketed at? That's definitely a conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
Further on this, and this is a very interesting paragraph to read about your marketing, because it also addresses the issue, if there's anything in that house that is not going to stay with the property, as an example, or they don't want people, to know, then that needs to be removed right away before the pictures are taken. And I'll use an example like chandeliers, pictures of your children, pictures of your grandkids. Get all that stuff out of there. Especially pictures of family members and kids. If anybody is concerned about, it being out there on the open market for pretty much, once it aggregates, anybody to see. So just, make sure you have that conversation with them. Further, under multiple listing services, seller acknowledges that MLS is not a party to this agreement and is or not responsible for errors and omissions on the part of seller or broker. Seller agrees to indemnify service from and against any and all claims, liabilities, damages, or losses arising of or related to the listing and sale of the property. Seller acknowledges that by virtue of listing the property in the MLS, all MLS members and their affiliated licenses will have access to seller's listing information for the purpose of assisting seller in the sale of the property. And that's directly related to photographs. Okay, so MLS is saying, hey, if your agent takes a picture and puts it out there and your, grandmother's antique vase from, Russia gets stolen, then the antique vase from Russia should have been removed before the photograph was taken. So there's some common sense there as well. But have that conversation. Okay. Lock boxes. Since prospective buyers and others will have access to the property, seller agrees to either remove all values, prescription drugs, and/or keys and put them in a secure place. Again, it goes back to what we just talked about, and this is on the lockbox with access to the property. So I know a lot of people like to use those combo boxes, and they're handy. And it depends on where your listing is, if you're on the outskirts of the city or in the metro area. I recommend using the Supra because, you can track it, who goes in and out, and, it aligns and pairs with showing time really, really well. So highly recommended because, and further, a lot of people don't think about prescription drugs, and they sit out on their counter in their bathroom and then, they're gone. So have that conversation. Here's another thing that came up. Please go ahead.
Hey, Renee, one question on lock boxes, and I'm just curious. I'm starting to see new type of lock boxes coming along
Mhm.
where you actually have to sign up and pay a fee to actually get in. Is there anything big there that you know about, or you think we're
Um,
gonna continue to have evolution of lock boxes?
I don't know, and that could have something to do, Zillow bought showing time. So I don't know, that could have something to do with showing time having their own lock boxes or competing against Supra. I don't know. I haven't seen them personally on any properties that I've showed, but I'm sure that they're out there. Or they could just be, you can go in and buy them offline that are code readers, but if you have a super key and you're with a lockbox that it's not going to read your key, I don't know how beneficial that would be to the realtor.
No, this was, I had this yesterday. This was an automated lockbox where you have to go in and register, sign, had to pay $1 on credit card to actually go and use the code to get in.
I've
This
never
was
heard of it.
Brookshire.
Yeah.
So it was, it's a different way of kind of hard when I had to get out the door. I didn't realize I had to go sign up and pay a fee to get in. Of course, my buyer liked me. They're like, "We got to pay." I said, "Yeah, don't worry about it." I didn't tell them it was just $1, but it's something new.
Thanks, Alan, for bringing that forward. And that was Berkshire. Has anybody else heard of that? Anybody using it?
I've seen them.
Who's this? Have you seen them? Huh. Was it a Berkshire listing? Okay.
I've seen those boxes on other properties lately.
Okay. No, that's a new one for me. I'm glad you brought it up, Alan. But at the same time, we still got to do what we got to do. That's interesting news to have. I'm going to do some research on that as well, because I hadn't heard of that. Okay. No marketing by.
I've seen them on rental properties.
Say it again, please.
I just said that I've seen those boxes on rental properties lately.
Okay, Nancy, thank you. You might want to put that in the chat because you were breaking up really bad on that one, and I didn't hear your last comment. But if you'd like, just put it in the chat and we'll get to it in a sec. Okay, no marketing by seller. Seller is encouraged to communicate the availability of property for the sale to friends and other acquaintances. However, since broker has been hired to exclusively market and show the property, seller shall not, with respect to the sale of the property, prepare and distribute marketing materials, hold open houses, put up signs regarding the property, create websites, prepare flyers, brochures, videos, or engage in similar activities without the prior written consent of the broker. They'll get out there, they'll put it on their Facebook page. And, the one thing about them hiring you under an exclusive agreement is that you need to have that control of everybody asking questions about the property. So again, a conversation to have with your seller. Please tell your friends and family, but don't do any marketing. Let me handle it. And if they want to be involved with it or you want to give them consent, that's fine. But just be aware, sometimes it can do more harm than good. If they're 13-year-old teenagers bouncing around inside the house and then it goes on TikTok or wherever, might not be the best representation that you want to put the property out there for sale. So bear that in mind. Also, 13-year-old teenager, not good. Okay, commissions, obligation to pay commission. In the event that the house sold and closes during the lease term or during the term of this agreement and or lease term, you will be paid a commission. That's their obligation to pay. It doesn't hurt to reiterate this with the seller. And if they understand this agreement, in my opinion, they'll be less likely to cancel this agreement. and more likely to extend because they feel that you're doing a great job and you're being transparent. If this agreement specifies that no commission is to be paid by the seller's broker to the cooperating broker, then no such commission obligation shall exist. I highlighted this because this involves sharing of a broker's commission with a cooperating broker, okay? On the reason why the buyer's agency agreements were changed to add a commission is less and less sellers are willing to pay two brokers in the transaction, which in turn is reducing listing agreements to 3%, 4%, 5%, sometimes less. So it is an option not to offer it. You can still put it into the MLS without an offer of cooperation or commission. But bear in mind, it's tough. And you've got to tread lightly with that, even with the buyer's agency agreement. But again, the seller's kind of dictating the commission amount and who they want to pay it to. So please understand that you're not obligated to share with a cooperating broker. Okay, protected period. Again, we talked about it earlier. This kind of goes in and hashes out the number of days. Like say you have a 6-month listing agreement, they cancel after 3 months. The protected period would begin after the natural termination of the agreement. So like I said, if they cancel 3 months in and you've still got 3 months to go on the original agreement, it would be 3 months plus your 90 days or your 30 days or your 160 days, 80 days, whatever you want it to be. So again, you might want to go over this paragraph with your seller again, so that they understand that a protected period is important. Agency and brokerage. Lead-based paint disclosure, again, reiterates the Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act of 92. Doesn't hurt to reiterate that with them. And again, negotiation. All decisions regarding price, terms, and other conditions in a contract to sell shall be made by seller. Okay? Rare that anyone would say, I don't want you to negotiate my house for me. I'll do it. But again, they have the right to do it. Seller's property disclosure statement.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Is there any like formality with dropping the price? Like, are we supposed to have like a form filled out when it comes to reducing the price?
There should be an amendment to this agreement. If you agree to list it for 300 and then you drop it to 250, there should be a price reduction amendment in the file.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to get that in writing, because then a seller, I always go worst case scenario. A seller could say, well, I never told you to drop at 50. I told you to drop at 5, and then you've got 47 contracts
Right.
at 250. So that's
Renee, wouldn't an email from the seller suffice if they put it in writing?
yes, as long as you take that email, print it out, and make it part of the file, so there's documentation that the seller wanted the price reduced. Whomever's talking, you're breaking up. Okay, so let's go on. Other terms and conditions, and remember, folks, we are deep into this. We are on page 6 of 10. Very few people ever read pages 2 through 9. But this stuff is important and it needs to be, recognized and or a quick discussion with your client, the seller. So seller's property disclosure statement. Okay. A seller's property disclosure statement is there to disclose known latent defects. Okay. a lot of people will get by and say, well, my seller never lived in the property, so we don't have to do a disclosure. I don't agree with that. And here's the reason why. It goes back to risk for the seller and risk for the listing agent and broker. So what I mean by that is if, it's a rental property or an investment property, they haven't lived there, great. They know about that property. And it's either, yes, I know something, or no, I know nothing. There is a long seller's property disclosure form, and there is a short seller's property disclosure form. If they never lived in the home or they don't know of any known latent defects, then please have them fill out the short form. If they've lived in the house for 20 years, have them fill out the long form, or not even 20. It can be any amount of time, but they are physically living in the property. Have them fill out the long form. Okay. Like I said, it's all about mitigating risk to the seller. And, if a seller doesn't know about it and it's discovered in an inspection, great, you can address it. But if you're selling a property as is, with no warranties or guarantees and no seller's disclosure, it doesn't necessarily protect your seller from further risk. Recently I had an agent that called that, and the seller actually had an seller's property disclosure, but they disclosed that they were on city sewer system, and it turned out that they were actually on septic. The seller didn't know that, and he had lived in the house for quite some time. So when the new buyer moved in about 6 months down the road, the septic tank just literally malfunctioned, exploded. It was a mess. It was very expensive. Those buyers were able to take that seller to court and win because it was disclosed incorrectly on the seller's disclosure. So if there's even a question about a seller not really knowing, I don't know if that's sewer or septic, then help them find out. You don't have to complete the seller's disclosure for them, and I don't want to have anybody do that. But you can help them if they need it or they don't know something like that. So again, hazardous conditions on the property. If you have a property that you're listing and it has, some outbuildings like an old barn or a shed or whatever, please have the seller go in, and if there's any hazardous conditions within that shed or even on the property, if there's a well that's uncovered, have them get that stuff covered up before people start previewing the property. And especially wells, and especially, in the rural areas that are just now starting to be developed. People are coming across those, and buying raw land, and, it's not good if something falls down a well. So again, these are things that you need to come forth in your knowledge and your understanding of selling the property and what they have to disclose and what they're responsible for. However, in this paragraph, it does indemnify and hold the broker harmless if against any and all claims of cause of action, suits, damages arising out of or relating to a person or persons being injured or harmed while on the property. So that protects us. That's our risk management, but it's not protecting the seller. And that's your fiduciary responsibility, is to mitigate risk for the seller at all times. So just have them bring it forward on the agreement, have them look at it. Okay. Again, another argument that's been recently on a listing agreement is notification. Please, you might want to share this with them. Under the standard GAR purchase and sale agreement, notice received by the broker is deemed to be notice received by the seller. Okay, so please explain to them, if you get a counter or a cancellation or whatever from a co-oping broker or a buyer individually, that constitutes notification of the seller. Okay, they can't say, well, my agent didn't send it to me for 3 days, or I was in the Bahamas, I don't agree to that. once you're notified, that's deemed received by the seller. So, just bring that up to them. You are representing them in the sale. Fraudulent activities, please, please, please protect yourself. If you come across any type of mortgage fraud or any type of illegal actions or anything going on, please raise your hand, contact myself or John, that you think something's suspicious, unusual, or potentially illegal or fraudulent. Raise your hand, okay? And part of that also goes back to making sure that the people that are on the title of the property are the people listing the property. Okay, and here we are at arbitration. Miscellaneous arbitration. Again, to answer Alan's question earlier, everybody has to agree to arbitrate before we go to court or a claim is filed. Also further, this was something that came up last week, assignability. A listing agreement is not assignable to a third party. What it states in here is if the broker sells the brokerage to another brokerage, then the seller agrees to transfer the listing to the new brokerage, okay? If you leave a brokerage and you have a listing and you come to Chapman Hall and your listing was with Metro or Keller, then your seller is basically based on assignment, agreeing to let you take the listing with you. That doesn't mean your broker isn't, but it is a assignability in agreement that allows the broker to transfer the listing to another broker, okay? Again, something to mention. Definition, seller buyer, entire agreement, fair housing disclosure. Okay, I gotta tell you this. This is really important. And rampant, apparently. So there are testers out there, fair HUD housing testers that will call you up and either pretend to be a buyer or a seller. And depending on how you respond to them, there may or may not be a racial bias there or discrimination, and it could be a test. So please, please, please remember when showing houses, no redlining. Be totally transparent and honest. If they say they want Smyrna, show them everything in Smyrna. If they say they want Lithonia, show them everything in Lithonia. Don't try to redline anything. It's illegal. We don't condone it and will not stand for it with regard to any violation of fair housing rules. So please be aware, every phone call you take, think of them as possibly being a tester to test you. So please take it very, very seriously. Okay, let's see. Again, use of initials NA means not applicable. Broker and seller's duty, broker duties to seller. Please read this so that you understand what your responsibilities are. Further, take it down. Have the seller read this so that they understand what they're responsible for, and most definitely have them read events on a seller default, okay? Please, please, please read through these. There's a lot on seller default. It doesn't hurt to bring it forward and have them understand what that is. Cyber warning, cyber fraud is built in. And again, last but not least, let me finish real fast. Please provide them with the lead-based paint pamphlet, the mold, EPA, and protect yourself when selling real property. A lot of folks have gotten away from using brochures. They're there to help you explain not only your responsibility, but risks and even marketability of the properties that you're listing. Last but not least, retainer fee. It's okay to ask for a retainer fee. It's all about how you do it, and if you do it, there needs to be in writing what the fee is going to constitute in the amount of the fee. And if they write a check to you, the check has to be made out to Chapman Hall or to Crest or to one of the Chapman Hall companies. So that kind of constitutes the entire agency agreement. It's 10 pages. It's kind of a difficult read, but I encourage all of you to know this document. Now let's check the chat. If I can.
Question.
Sure, go right ahead.
Does Chapman Hall allow non-exclusive listing agreement?
We discourage them.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? I know we went through a lot of stuff. Any comments? Tom, do you have any comments on going back to that 180 protection period? Because I value your opinion. No response from Tom. Okay, let's look at chat. Hold on.
My question would be, why wouldn't you do a 180-day protection period?
I think that's too long.
What's the disadvantage?
The disadvantage is keeping up with it.
Okay.
And being on top of it and constantly having to check and verify and talk to the agents that showed it and, engaging in somebody that obviously didn't want you to list their property to begin with. And most people are going to buy
I
a
see.
house,
Okay.
but most people sincerely are going to buy a house typically, maybe not in weird markets, in 30, 60, or 90 days. So anything after that is just, I don't know, it just seems obnoxious to me. That's my
Okay.
opinion. Okay. Now, this is a great from Yvette. I think the protected period would work quickly to resolve issues within a brokerage. Say two people within the same brokerage get the same listing. Broker can easily settle a dispute. Yes and no, I do agree with that. But you're going to have to bring documentation to the table, and it's going to come down to the binding agreement date on the listing on who would have had that listing first or second. And I can honestly tell you, as the best of my knowledge, I do not know of any Chapman Hall agent or in any of our brokerages that would engage in that kind of activity. So
Can you hear me, Renee?
go ahead.
Can you hear me, Renee? This is Tom.
Hey,
Can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Okay. I lost the option to unmute, so I found it again.
Okay.
My thing is, I have always put 180 day on every listing I've had in the last 27 years. Okay.
Okay.
I'm not concerned about another. I'm not concerned really about anyone trying to take over my listing or commission. I'm more concerned about an investor contacting my seller and trying to work me out of the deal after the listing expires. That is my only true concern. I mean, I believe that if the listing expires and another agent gets it, that no matter if they've shown it during my listing time or another, I'm not due a commission anymore because they didn't make the offer during my listing period. So my concern really is with other investors, because we make the address public, that they could say, when does your listing expire? It's never happened to me, but I always tell my sellers, if someone contacts you during the listing period, please explain to them, you need to call Tom York, he's my agent. Or if you sit down in your Sunday morning church pew and the realtor sitting beside of you tells you you should fire Tom and hire me, that you should tell them they should call Tom because you have signed the agreement and he's already gone over that with them.
I agree with that. That you make an excellent case for that length of time, Tom. You absolutely do. And mostly because of the investors, because I understand completely where you're coming from on that.
And that's the only reason. And I write every listing agreement the exact same way. So, and I would never go show a property to someone who calls me without having a pre-qualification letter from their lender or actual proof of funds, because I believe someone who shows a property without that is discriminating against the other people.
I agree. Absolutely agree. That's good practices, Tom. And that's what I wanted to bring forward is, you know, you guys, all of you are so very, very successful and good at what you do. I'd love to get this knowledge as well. So thank you so much for bringing that forward. I agree with that.
Right, Renee, I agree with Tom too. And I've always put 120
Okay.
days, 180 better. I work with a lot of seniors. Sometimes when you list a home of a senior adult, you get family members who come in and they had somebody else in mind, or they've got a buyer in mind or whatever, and they're wanting to do things and talk mama or daddy into things that, you know, they shouldn't. And that's one of my reasons, because I've been caught in that a number of times. You know, the son or daughter didn't know me, but they did know their friend who was a realtor. So let's do something different here. And so that's one of my reasons. The other one is what you talked about. I mean, just what we've all talked about, you know, the sitting down in church and, you know, saying, you know, why don't you fire your realtor because mine's better, and
Yeah.
or we can work together, or I want to buy the house, but I'd rather buy it from you directly.
Right. Right.
Yeah, Renee,
Yes.
I have had a buyer of mine up and coming on a new build community try to go around me to the builder's agent because he thought he'd get the house cheaper. The
Yeah.
agent called me, was kind enough to do that, and wasn't going to have any part of it. And that was years ago. And then recently on one of my listings, I had an agent show a buyer, they lowballed. She was mad, fired her agent, went with another agent the next day, then came to me directly, you know, around the other agents. So people will do that thinking they're going to get the house cheaper, and they're not. So you've got to be protected, because buyers and sellers, and even longer ago, I can barely remember a buyer and seller tried to work around the agents to cut them out as well.
Yes.
So
I have a question about that, the protection period. So it's based on procure and sell, right? Like if you listed the house and the buyer came during your listing, the marketing that you put forth during the listing was what drew the buyer to the house, and therefore you procured the sale, correct?
Correct.
That is not
Okay.
correct. I disagree with that.
Well, okay. But so let me just say this. So if I don't sell the house during my listing period, or somebody had the listing before me, because I call a lot of expires. So somebody had the listing before me. I then come, I get the listing after it expired. I get the listing and convince them to drop the price before we list it. How could that be a procuring sale from the last agent if they weren't able to market the house? If they were marketing the house at a different price than what I'm marketing the house at, and now the buyer comes back because he likes the price that I listed the house for. In my opinion, is two different marketing of the house.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right. And it would only be procuring cause per se if the buyer was unrepresented. You know, if they're working with an agent, then it becomes the threshold rule. It's not necessarily the marketing that you create to get them through the door. It's who comes through the door with them. If they have representation, either with them or, you know, not with them, but they're under an agency agreement, then it wouldn't be considered a procuring clause thing. And I don't see how a protected period would protect you like that, other than some of the examples that Tom and Joyce used with regard to buyers and sellers trying to cut realtors out of the deal. Procuring cause is an odd thing because I've been to several ethics trials per se, whereby we won a procuring cause side and we lost a procuring cause side. And in both instances, we had an agency agreement. And I'm still trying to figure the second one out. I think it was ruled against us incorrectly, but you can't even really prove procuring cause anymore. It's even difficult to do that. So I wouldn't want to call it procuring cause coming across the threshold.
Renee?
Yes. Ken,
It's
how
Ken.
are you?
Listen, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but about this protected period, I use 180 days as well. Sometimes 90, but most of the time 180, depends on the buyer or seller. But the reason I've had instances, in fact, one last year where I had a buyer get a property or go to contract on a property, fell apart at the end, but it actually, in this case, it was a year later, went back, bought it, and we closed on it last year. It was commercial property, but even residential.
Right.
I just always have felt I'm not going into the detail. I think like we have been worried about checking everything along the way, but I just figure it's worked for me to use 180. So that's what I do. And I hear a lot of people saying it. So I guess it's whatever you're comfortable with, but I don't see a problem with the 180.
Agreed. I mean, you guys have changed my mind about it, quite frankly. And I think that this is a great forum to do that. Not everybody knows everything about everything. So these forums make an absolute difference. I'm convinced, you've completely convinced me, Tom and Joyce and Ken, that it does need to be longer. And here's the reason why. So I'm very appreciative of that. I do have one thing that I want to bring up on the chat is if Jasmine is still on the call with us. She wrote, I'm glad I'm on this call. I have several agents reaching out to me about 5236 Thai Trail, would love to know how to proceed. And her situation was that the seller terminated the agreement. She wouldn't let her show the house. She was always blocking or coming up with excuses to people not getting the property. She had it priced right. It was in a good location, and the seller was total non-cooperative. So if you guys were in a situation like this, how would you respond to Jasmine with regard to what next steps? And then I'll tell you what I would do. Well, let me tell you what I do first. I would tell her to immediately contact the seller with a list of people that are still interested in it. Because the seller hasn't listed it with another agent, and she only took it off the market because she didn't want to deal with people coming through the property to show it. So it's an odd conundrum.
I have a thought on that too. It's when I get into that, or when I've been in that situation, I always tried to figure out what the real cause might be. And a lot of times it's not as obvious as it, you think. And I had a particular situation where it just didn't make sense. And I found out that it was a divorce situation and it had to be an effort for them to stay in the home, but they really didn't want to move because they could stay there until the divorce was final. So a lot of times what appears to be obvious of someone just wanting to not work with you might be a whole scheme of something where somebody might want to try to stay 6 months to a year longer. And they're just showing due diligence that they're trying to do something. It can be really upsetting when you discover the real reasons and motives of what people may or may not do.
I want that. Okay. I'm going to get the car wash. I'll be back.
I haven't.
Keep coming up. Clean the dish with the washing machine vent. Not.
Okay.
Let me get the other one.
You know what I mean? It's fine.
Yeah.
Somebody's washing a car, dishwasher or something, but I haven't had that one. But just trying to understand the real motive. The other comment I have is that, I'm not sure the agent Tom, I really like the idea of how he reinforces that about being at church and about someone ask you. I think all too often when you're doing a listing agreement, you tend not to get into those touch points because you're afraid you're not going to get the listing. And I'm fault at that as well. But really at the end of the day, sometimes a listing or a person selling a house might not know. And it's good to remind them, hey, I'm going to be producing a list. I like the way Tom does it. It's like if you come into this scenario, you call me first. That's why you're in contract. Because I think all too often people sign things, they don't read things. If we get into another downturn like we did in 08, they'll come back and say, well, I didn't even know I was buying a house. You got to bail me out. Here's the keys. So
Yeah, I
I
agree.
like the fact of letting people know this is a serious track.
Yeah, I agree with that. And back to Jasmine's predicament, I'll call her later. I don't think she's on the call anymore, but it's like you said, just you've got to take control of it. And like I said, you've convinced me and converted me to a longer protected period by just, enforcing, what you're doing to begin with from the onset, of the listing. So I appreciate it.
Question about termination.
Mhm.
How does a client terminate a listing? What do they need to do to terminate a listing? Like if I have a listing and they want to go with a different brokerage, what's required of them to terminate the listing with me?
They have to terminate, they have to tell you in writing, and then you need to have them sign either a unilateral notice to cancel the agency or a mutual agreement to cancel the agency. So, but they have to notify you in writing.
Can I say something about that?
Sure, please.
I have never mutually allowed a seller out of a listing agreement. I have forcefully informed the seller. I had one who wanted out to do exactly what he just said, to list with another agent because he was mad that a new listing sold for his. And I explained to him that if he would have patience, that we would get, because he was literally sitting on the lake and had no backyard. And we sold that house for more money than the one that sold quicker. But I also explained to sellers that this is a contract for time, okay? And it's a specific time. And if they don't agree with the time, they should not sign the contract because I will not let them out without paying my commission.
Mhm. And that's setting expectations up front, which I agree with. Yes.
It is setting it up front. And I tell, if you set the stage up front and you've already gone over this with the sellers, you have a lot of, your seller will be bonded to you because they know he told me the truth up front. So don't be
where does
involved.
Where does it say that they will have to pay your commission?
Seller default.
Seller default. He's absolutely correct.
Sure does. I have a contract for time. This is not a contract of convenience. This is a legal binding contract. And any unethical agent who tries to take the listing away from you should lose their real estate license. They really should.
I agree.
So where's that in the
That's
listing
called
agreement?
crossing the sign, which is illegal.
Okay, Richard, it's on.
Renee, where's that in the listing agreement?
Okay, it's on page 8, paragraph 8. It talks in depth about seller default. Page 8, paragraph 8 on the exclusive seller listing agreement.
Okay.
But Tom, you're right. And that's
what the very first one terminates the agreement prior to the end of the agreement without the prior written agreement of the broker. Okay. So if the broker doesn't agree, they can't terminate this. They can terminate this agreement, but they're going to owe me my commission and they're going to pay it.
Absolutely.
And an honest agent and that knows the contract is a strong, powerful agent, and an agent who doesn't know the contract, same as the purchase and sell agreement, They need to learn that purchase and sale agreement backwards and forwards.
Tom, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I wanted to have these sessions because, you know, you're setting expectations up front. It's real hard to go after somebody for a commission if the seller doesn't understand the expectations up front. Even a buyer doesn't understand it and how it falls into it. But the bottom line is, you can't let people walk all over you. This is how you earn your living. This is how you get paid. Use the contract to your advantage. Period. Set expectations up front. Agree.
And it says shall not be evidence of the broker's agreement to mutually terminate it, but instead just merely of acquiescence of the broker to the unilaterally terminate the agreement. So they owe the commission. And that other agent who takes the listing should go in front of the Board of Ethics.
Agreed. Any more comments or questions? I think this was a great call today. I learned from you guys so much, and I'm greatly appreciative because I think it benefits us all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you. Next week, we're going to talk about the other types of agency, and we're going to start our dive into the purchase and sale agreement. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Renee.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.